The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, The Common Basis of Hinduism, Part 2. Before trying to find out the precise point where we are all agreed, the common ground of our nation life, one thing we must remember. Just as there is an individuality in every man, so also there is a national individuality. As one man differs from another in certain particulars, in certain characteristics of his own, so one race differs from another in a certain peculiar characteristics. And just as it is the mission of every man to fulfill a certain purpose in the economy of nature, just as there is a particular line set out for him by his own past karma, so it is with the nations. Each nation has a destiny to fulfill. Each nation has a message to deliver. Each nation has a mission to accomplish. Therefore, from the very start, we must have to understand the mission of our own race, the destiny it has to fulfill, the place it has to occupy in the march of nations, the note which it has to contribute to the harmony of races. In our country, when children, we hear stories about how some serpents having jewels in their heads, and whatever one may do with the serpent, so long as the jewel is there, the serpent cannot be killed. We hear stories of giants and ogres who had souls living in certain little birds, and so long as the bird was safe, there was no power on earth to kill these giants. You might hack them to pieces or do what you liked with them, the giants just would not die. So it is with nations. There is a certain point where the life of a nation centers, where lies the nationality of the nation, and until that is touched, the nation cannot die. In the light of this, we can understand the most marvelous phenomenon that the history of the world has ever known. Wave after wave of barbarian conquest has rolled over this devoted land of ours. Allahu Akbar has rent the skies for hundreds of years, and no Hindu knew what moment would be his last. This is the most suffering and the most subjugated of all historic lands of the world. Yet, we still stand practically the same race, ready to face difficulties again and again if necessary. And not only so, of late there have been signs that we are not only strong, but ready to go out, for the sign of life is expansion. We find today that our ideas and our thoughts are no more cooped up within the bounds of India, but whether we will on it or not, they are marching outside, filtering into the literature of the nations, taking their place among nations, and in some even getting a commanding dictatorial position. Behind this, we find the explanation that the great contribution to the sum total of the world's progress from India is the greatest, the noblest, the sublimest theme that can occupy the mind of man. It is philosophy and spirituality. Our ancestors tried many other things. Like other nations, first went to bring out the secrets of external nature, as we all know, and with their gigantic brains, that marvelous race could have done miracles in that line of which the world could have been proud forever. But they gave it up for something higher. Something better rings from the pages of the Vedas. The science is the greatest which makes us know Him who never changes. The science of nature, changeful, evanescent, the world of death, of woe, of misery may be great, great indeed. but the science of Him who changes not, the blissful one, who alone is peace, where alone is life eternal, where alone is perfection, where alone all misery ceases, that, according to our ancestors, was the sublimest science of all. After all, sciences that can give us only bread and clothes and power over our fellow men, sciences that can only teach us how to conquer our fellow beings, to rule over them, which teach the strong to domineer over the weak, those they can have discovered if they willed. But praise be unto the Lord, they caught at once the other side, which was grander, infinitely higher, infinitely more blissful, till it has become the national characteristic, till it has become, remains there no power under the sun that can kill the race. All the tortures and miseries of the world will pass over without hurting us, and we shall come out of the flames like Prahlad, so long as we can hold on to this grandest of all our inheritances, spirituality. If a Hindu is not spiritual, I do not call him a Hindu. In other countries, a man may be political first, and then he may have a little religion. But here in India, the first and the foremost duty of our lives is to be spiritual first. And then, if there is time, let other things come. Bearing this in mind, we shall be in a better position to understand why, for our national welfare, we must first seek out at present day all the spiritual forces of the race, as was done in the days of the yore, and will be done in all times to come. National union in India must be a gathering up of all its scattered spiritual forces. Our nation in India must be a union of those whose hearts beat to the same spiritual tune. There have been sects enough in this country. There are sects enough, and there will be enough in the future, because this has been the peculiarity of our religion, that in abstract principles so much latitude has been given that although afterwards so much detail has been worked out, all these details are the working out of principles broad as the skies above our heads, eternal as the nature herself. Sects, therefore, as a matter of course, must exist here, but what need not exist is sectarian quarrel. Sects must be, but sectarianism need not. The world would not be a better for sectarianism, but the world cannot move on without having sects. One set of men cannot do everything. The almost infinite mass of energy in the world cannot be managed by a small number of people. Here at once we see the necessity that forced this division of labor upon us, the division into sects. For the use of spiritual forces, let there be sects. But is there any need that we should quarrel when our most ancient books declare that this differentiation is only apparent, that in spite of all these differences that there is a thread of harmony, that beautified unity running through them all? Our most ancient books have declared that which exists is one. Sages call him by various names. Therefore, if there are these sectarian struggles, if there are these fights among the different sects, if there is jealousy and hatred between different sects in India, the land where all sects have always been honored, it is a shame on us who dare to call us ourselves the descendants of those fathers. There are certain principles in which I think we, whether Vaishnavas, Shaivas, Shaktas or Ganapatyas, whether belonging to the ancient Vedantists or to the modern ones, whether belonging to the old rigid sects or the modern reformed ones, are all one. And whoever calls himself a Hindu believes in these principles. Of course, there is a difference in the interpretation, in the explanation of these principles. and that difference should be there. And it should be allowed, for our standard is not to bind every man down to our position. It would be a sin to force every man to work out our own interpretation of things and to live by our own methods. Perhaps all who are here will agree on the first point, that we believe that the Vedas are eternal teachings of the secrets of the religion. We believe that this holy literature is without beginning and without end, coeval with nature, which is without beginning and without end, and that all our religious differences, all our religious struggles must end when we stand in the presence of that holy book. We are all agreed that this is the last court of appeal in all our spiritual differences. We may take different points of view as to what the Vedas are. There may be one sect which regards one portion as more sacred than another. But that matters little so long as that we say that we are all brothers in the Vedas. That out of these venerable, eternal, marvelous books have come everything that we possess today, good, holy, and pure. Well, therefore, if we believe in all this, let this principle first of all be preached, broadcast throughout the length and breadth of the land. If this be true, let the Vedas have that prominence which they always deserve and which we all believe in. First, then the Vedas. The second point we all believe in is God, the creating, the preserving power of the whole universe, and unto whom it periodically returns to come out at other periods and manifest this wonderful phenomenon called the universe. We may differ in our conception of God. One may believe in a God which is entirely personal. Another may believe in a God which is personal and yet not human. And yet another may believe in a God who is entirely impersonal. And all may get their support from the Vedas. Still, we are all believers in God. That is to say, that man who does not believe in a most marvelous infinite power from which everything has come, in which everything lives, and to which everything must in the end return, cannot be preached or cannot be called a Hindu. If that be so, let us try to preach that idea all over the land. Preach whatever conception you have to give. There is no difference. We are not going to fight over it, but preach God. That is all we want. One idea may be better than another, but mind you, not one of them is bad. One is good, another is better, and again another may be the best. But the word bad does not enter the category of our religion. Therefore, may the Lord bless them all who preach the name of God in whatever form they like. The more he is preached, the better for this race. Let our children be brought up in this idea. Let this idea enter the homes of the poorest and the lowest, as well as of the richest and the highest. The idea of the name of God.